Hello and good evening to all of our attendees tonight. My name is Daryl Davis and I serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Equity, Inclusion, and Innovation for Kansas City Public Schools. We welcome you tonight to tonight's Town Hall discussion. Also serving as co-moderator, we have Ms. Kelly Waitrell, who is the Chief Communications and Marketing Director. She is, you see Kelly there, she just waved at you. Our role will be to facilitate tonight's conversation. I will largely facilitate the discussion amongst our panelists, and Kelly will work with the audience on engagement. Kelly, do you want to share with the audience how they can engage in tonight's discussion?
Of course. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you. It's an important conversation and really appreciate you joining us this evening. A couple items for you. You're welcome to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You will only see the questions that you submit as an attendee, and then we'll release those to the group to ask questions to everyone. And Dr. Davis will, again, ask those questions, and our group of wonderful panelists will answer those questions for you. So I see our first one, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. Along this event. So if you have a desire and you use Twitter and you tweet a lot or don't tweet a lot, feel free to tweet and use the hashtag KCPS-Equity. We did just tweet our first reminder about the event tonight using that hashtag. So look forward to seeing some comments with that hashtag again, hashtag KCPS-Equity. Also, one other quick note, we do have a language facilitator here this evening. So if you submit a question in Spanish, Swahili, French, or Kinyarwanda, that's a combination of Kenya and Rwanda, as I just learned this evening. We'll be happy to take those questions and translate them to answer at a later time or even on the call tonight. So again, happy to have you all. Dr. Davis is going to introduce our panelists and we'll get rolling. Thanks for being here.
All right, great. Thank you, Kelly. So joining us for tonight, we have a distinguished panel of community leaders and KCPS leaders and students and other guests for this educational equity in the age of COVID-19. First, we have Dr. Mark Bedell, Superintendent of Kansas City Public Schools.
Hello.
All right. He's not gonna wave, everyone recognizes him. We have Miss Gwendolyn Grant, the CEO of the Urban League of Greater Kansas City. Okay. We have Dr. Marla Shepard, Deputy Superintendent of Kansas City Public Schools. Okay, thank you. All right, we have Miss Adriele Johnson, a graduating senior from Central High School. We have Mr. Doug Bartle, ELL Services Coordinator at East High School. We have Mr. Joe Phillips, Director of Technology for KCPS. We have Mr. Jordan Gordon, Director of Nutrition Services for KCPS. We have Dr. Letitia Woodley, Executive Director of Student Support Services for KCPS. We have Ms. Ava Santiago, the Coordinator of Plaza Comunitaria, which is a partnership that we have with the Mexican Consulate. We also have with us this evening, we have Ms. Allison Howe, who is the Director of Language Services and Cultural Equity. And we have Dr. Trinity Davis, the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction. And we have Dr. Jaquita Lowry, who is the Director of Exceptional Education. And we also have Dr. Jennifer Collier, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer, and Ms. Erin Thompson, who is the Executive Director of Budget and Finance. And we have Dr. Lloyd Jackson, who is the Assistant Superintendent of School Leadership. Did I hit everyone on the call? Okay. All right, well, thank you. So tonight's discussion will focus on educational equity. And when we discuss equity, it's really about fairness and making sure that all students, regardless of race, gender, national origin, that they are able to access all of the programs, initiatives, and resources that Kansas City Public Schools has to offer. We want to ensure we treat this as a moral imperative that every student can meaningfully participate and get the most out of this educational experience in Kansas City. We're going to start off our questions this evening with Dr. Bedell. So Dr. Bedell, why was it so important that we have this discussion at this particular point in time on equity?
Well, I would tell you, first of all, I want to thank all of our participants and everybody who's serving as panelists here. We've done a number of panels like this throughout the country, and I felt that it was important that we do something here right in our own backyard. And I would tell you that going through this process of this health pandemic, in my opinion, really forced a lot of the inequities that we see in this city to move right to the surface. It showed us that when we don't have all of the resources, or when we don't have necessarily the planning that we need to be able to control for disasters like this, that ultimately those who are generally the most advantaged, least represented, tend to be the ones that continue to fall further and further behind. And I think as a community, we have to begin to call it out the way that we see it. We need to name it, but you need to also be able to back it up with data. And I think for us, learning about the Wi-Fi disparities, like we knew there were Wi-Fi disparities. And I think as a system, we could have done a better job of being more proactive in that area. Although we did provide laptops, and we did have a partnership with Sprint, we never imagined that we would be in a situation where 100, that like 60 to 70% of our families would need that, and we just weren't ready for it. And I think as a school district, our job is to be able to have this conversation with you all, to talk about the different areas, how we're combating some of these inequities, and then also to get Q&As from you around what is it that we could do better, because we know the experience wasn't that great for many of our viewers. I think there was frustration all over, but we're a very transparent district, and we want to be able to hear from you all. We want to learn from this, because if this happens again, what I can assure you is we won't be in the same situation we were in at the end of March and having to finish out this year the way that we did.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bedell. As Dr. Bedell mentioned, we really are looking at how our families and students have been able to access resources during this coronavirus pandemic. Gwen Grant, the notion of equity really has been systemic. And is there more that you can share as how inequity has been baked into our system above and beyond education?
Sure, and I would like to begin by saying thank you so much for engaging in this important conversation, and thank you for inviting me to play a part in it. It is really quite timely and most definitely important. So what I would say is that we have to understand the historical, economic, and social barriers that have made it very difficult for our communities to have equitable access to quality education and to quality healthcare, employment opportunities. We have been systemically and structurally isolated from access to the social and economic opportunities in this country, and as well as in this community. And so you have to understand, how did we get here, especially as it relates to education? Well, we know that we had separate and unequal schools prior to desegregation, but it's important to understand after desegregation in Kansas City, we were left with redlining, residential segregation, high concentrated poverty in urban communities, white flight from the urban school districts to suburban school districts, which ultimately then created an environment in which we have been unable to pass a levy for more than 50 years to fully fund and support the activities of public education in our urban community. Every other school district is able to pass a levy. KCPS has not been able to pass a levy for more than 50 years. These are systemic and structural barriers to educational and economic opportunity. So that poverty then translates into low education attainment, low wage jobs, high unemployment rates, Prior to the pandemic, unemployment rate for African Americans, even in a full employment economy, was 1.5 times to 2 times higher than their white counterparts. In a pandemic, where we are today, the African American unemployment rate is hovering at 18%. And that's only going up, and it's going to be that way for a while. So these deep inequities by race are significant and have a major impact on education outcomes for children of color. Just one last little tidbit to really drive it home. A white family is likely to have $10 for every $1 of income that a Black family has. That's how big the economic divide is, and that plays out in education, health, every quality of life indicator.
All right. Thank you very much for providing. Thank you very much for providing that context. Dr. Shepherd, Gwen Grant shared that there were some historical inequities that kept a generation or several from being able to access the educational opportunities that were available in Kansas City. The COVID-19 pandemic created a potential reason for students to not have access yet again. Can you share with us and the audience in what ways were students able to access the instruction during the last 6 weeks of school?
Yes. Well, for the last 6 weeks of school, we actually deployed our electronic devices with the support from our instructional technology team. We went into schools and we made sure that every student who said they needed one was able to get one. But one of the things that we did not provide at the moment was access to Wi-Fi hotspots. We realized that we did not have the hotspots because they were caught up in customs. And so once we got the hotspots, we were able to distribute the hotspots as well. And we learned that so many of our students lacked electronic devices, and they also lacked hotspots in order to access all of the lessons that we were doing online and the Google classrooms that their teachers were engaging in. And so for the last 6 weeks, first we issued the laptops, and then once we got our hotspots in, we were able to distribute those hotspots, and we were able to see increased numbers in participation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Shepherd. I think this would be a great time for Adriele Johnson, student at Central High School, to chime in. And Adriele, we would like to hear from you. What was your experience like finishing out your final 6 weeks online?
Honestly, it was kind of difficult to adjust to, as far as like me being a senior in high school and having to like request transcripts and recommendation letters for colleges to accept me. And so honestly, it was something that was hard to adjust to, but once I got the hang of it, it was easier for me to like give the colleges and stuff my recommendation letters, in contact with my teachers. So I mean, it was something that I had to get used to for the 6 weeks.
All right, thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Doug Bartle. Doug, how do you feel teachers were able to adjust to going online with the virtual instruction, and how well prepared were they for this?
Sure. So at the high school level, we're one-to-one. So each student has their own piece of technology, Chromebooks in our case. So we already really use Google Classroom, use Odysseyware. So really it wasn't, from a teacher preparedness perspective, it wasn't a big jump to distance learning. And I think teachers in general were pretty well prepared. There are hiccups, as there always are, and the district has provided PD for that. So I think from a teacher preparedness standpoint, it went pretty smoothly.
Okay, great. Glad to hear that things went smoothly. If there were any challenges to engaging students in the online instruction, what were they, and how did teachers navigate those challenges to provide solutions?
Sure. So I think by far the biggest obstacle we faced was communication with students. So I work with English language learners at East High School. And so all of the really important information from the district about hotspots, makeup assignments, they went out really in Spanish and English, which is great for the families that speak those languages. But we have, almost 50 other languages in the district, and they really didn't get that information. So what that meant for us is that paras and bilingual staff were calling each student individually to ask them about technology. Do you have a hotspot? Do you have a computer? And just at East High School alone, that's 600 kids. So that significantly delayed making sure that people had connections to internet, and therefore, being able to participate fully in distance learning. So that was definitely the biggest challenge. Talking Points is a great app that we discovered that sends out auto-translated text to families, which is a great tool, but it's definitely not the end-all be-all. So it's definitely something we should think about in the future, especially if distance learning comes back.
Dr. Davis, we do have a live question that maybe goes in hand with this topic. Do you see the question there?
Yes, I do. Joe, I'm going to toss this to Joe. So, actually, this is asking about policy. So, the question coming from Danielle Robinson is, policy where certain schools or grades receive Chromebooks at the beginning of the year. And so, as Doug Barlow just mentioned, that the high schools were one-to-one. So I believe this question is getting to, what about K-8? What was the K-8 involvement in one-to-one prior to COVID, and how have we engaged K-8 since COVID-19?
Do you want me to answer that, or you want Joe? I can answer it. Who you want to answer?
Go ahead, Dr. Bedell.
Yeah, so basically the way our system is set up, at the 9th through 12th grade level, the students receive their devices and they're allowed to take those devices home and get instruction in that manner. In the K through 2 grades, we have iPads. And so we, as a district, we didn't have the rubber covers, something that I have on mine. I broke probably about 3 of these. I broke about 3 of these before I decided to get this little protective case. And I think for us, making sure that we protect that investment, we didn't want those going home and dropping, and they break pretty easily and they're expensive. So that's where I think we ran into a problem, because in grades 3 through 8, we have laptops, but those laptops stay in the class. So we had enough. Our issue was when we started to look at those students in K through 2, where we felt that, we just didn't have enough. And is that correct, Joe? Joe?
Yeah, that's really, really good. With the exception of grade 7 through 8, we had those in carts as well. So in elementary grades, it's much easier because those students are self-contained in that classroom. So if you have 25 students in a classroom, 25 devices, that's easy. 7th and 8th grade, those students move around class to class. And so there are only Chromebooks in certain core curriculum classes. And so we actually didn't have enough to pivot quickly to make sure that we had enough for all K through 8 because of that ratio that we had.
All right. So that's, and we know right now, to further answer that question, we will be a complete one-to-one school district by the end of the summer. We just got our board to accept a $4 million investment in laptops. And so we will be full-blown 100% one-to-one should we run into this again in the fall.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And what I hear in response to that question is that prior to COVID, we did not have necessarily enough computers for all of the students K-8, but we do now have those ordered per the dollar amount that Dr. Bedell just answered and provided. Joe, we do have one more question from the audience we want to take before we move on from this conversation around technology. And from Tracy Johnson, she has a question. In what ways can KCPS provide training for parents and families in how to utilize the digital learning tools? Are there any plans for that? And maybe that is also a question for Dr. Shepherd.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is I can answer part of that question and then Dr. Shepard can answer the rest. So one thing that we're doing right now is getting a platform where we can put staff training as well as parent and student training on a platform where they can come and do training. So there's certain trainings that work very well in an online platform, and depending on how savvy or technical parents might be, the platform might be a great option for them. But we also understand that we'll have some parents and some students who don't have the technical skills yet for that platform to even add a lot of value, and that's where Dr. Shepard's plan will come in. So I'll let her pick up there.
Yes, one of the things that we're working on right now is a parent university, and I have Dr. Davis on the call right now so she can speak more to that. But we're working on a parent university that is not necessarily virtual, although we will offer it virtually. I believe that having parents to come in and actually see the devices, and for us to be able to walk them through the devices, how to turn them on, how to use them, how to install the Wi-Fi hotspots, all of those things. And so we're looking at having a robust parent institute so that we can make sure that parents are trained in the event that we have to start school virtually, or if we have to interrupt school at some point to have virtual learning. We need to make sure that our parents understand that. And Dr. Davis, did you want to speak a little more to what our plans are looking like and when exactly we plan on launching this parent university?
Yes, we actually have a meeting tomorrow as we'll begin to roll out a plan for us to work with parents on, again, how to use the devices, as Dr. Shepard said, but go on one step further to make sure that parents know how to use all the platforms. And then we'll move into instructional support for parents to show them, if we aren't in school, what standards and what things they need to be able to teach their students at home. We'll also make videos for parents so they can see the kind of work they need to be doing at home.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dr. Shepard and Dr. Davis. And I believe you just answered another question that I was going to go to next, which was from Emily Ferreira, in that parents of young children especially were thrust recently into the role of being a teacher or co-teacher, and wanting to make sure that parents receive that support in not only technology skills, but then also in how to best support their young people at home. And as Dr. Bedell mentioned earlier, there's a great chance that this will come back around again. And so when I heard you mention those videos, I think that would be a great starting point. And to Emily and others who are wanting that support, I believe we will also roll out an even more robust plan to engage parents in this process as we move forward. So thank you for those questions. And we will take more questions here in just a little bit. And so technology has sparked a lot of interest in equity and our ability to access not only the technology tools, but then also the hotspots and the Wi-Fi. Let's move and transition over to breakfast and lunch. I know that even before COVID-19, we've oftentimes had conversations about how do we make sure every student can access that particular resource, even sometimes even on the weekends. But through COVID, are there any other considerations that had to be given to making sure that students and families could access the breakfast and lunch that was available? I'm directing that to Mr. Jordan Gordon.
Yes, we had to, number one and first and foremost, we had to develop a plan that would ensure the safety of not only our staff, but also our families and participants that would come and participate in the program. Second to that, we had to engage DESE at the state level to understand our boundaries under a traditional breakfast and lunch or school meal program. There are restrictions that prohibit us from feeding kids from a remote space, i.e. grab and go, which is what we ultimately decided to go with during this time as the safest approach. So once we got the necessary waivers with USDA, as well as Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we then began to simply work the plan that we had established that would assure the greatest capacity and reach for our families during this time.
Okay, all right, thank you so much, Jordan. Looking at the questions from the audience. We have from Miss Susan Campbell. She loves the idea of Parent University. Her question is, will this be taught in different languages? And so to that, I'm going to ask if Allison Howe can chime in, and what is our ability to provide these resources for multiple languages?
So that's a great question. We actually just had a meeting with Joe and his team last week regarding how we were going to tackle this. And it was one of the things we uncovered as this started to roll out, and we started to hear from families about how they were struggling with connecting, even opening up devices, getting the hotspots activated once they got them. And not to mention getting on Google Classroom and Seesaw and that sort of thing. So we're working on getting scripts on for the videos that are coming out, and we'll have interpreters that can translate them. And then Joe's team is going to help dub those translations over the videos, and we'll have them in multiple languages for families. We have a couple that we're working on already, and we have translated documents also that we have out for teachers, but that is about to begin.
Yeah, and in addition to the Parent University and those videos, I do want to highlight that any family should be able to call our help desk at 418-HELP or 4357 to get the help that they need. And one of the things that we worked with Ms. Heil on last week or earlier this week was making sure that we were using our interpreter service appropriately when parents are calling in for that type of help. So we have people on my team that speak Spanish. I have about 4 or 5 people that are fluent in Spanish, but when these other languages that are spoken, those individuals call in, we need to be able to provide them that same level of support. Because when we talk about equity, we're really talking about what every student needs every day and not just what the majority of our students need. So we want to make sure that we're able to provide the same service level to every single one of our parents and students.
Right. Thank you all so much. I'm going to toss this to Ava Santiago. We know that community partnerships are so important, and Dr. Bedell often says that schools can't do this work alone. In what ways, Ava, do you see possibly the Plaza Comunitaria supporting the Parent University efforts?
Well, community partnerships have been so very important, because when I'm referring parents to different resources, sometimes they're hesitant to call different community centers because they're like, well, what if they don't speak English? And then I'm coming from the lens of the immigrant community and the undocumented community, and they may be less likely to reach out because they will just be like, I got this, I need the help. But in an age where there's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric and COVID and uncertainty, they're less likely to reach out. And so Maddie Rhodes has been a super wonderful community partner, and hoping that in collaboration with the Mexican consulate, KCPS can offer those Parent University classes in Spanish. And also, be mindful of, culturally relevant topics and content, depending on which community we're addressing.
All right, thank you. And staying on that topic of community partnerships, I'm going to ask Jordan Gordon if there were any community partnerships that you worked with in expanding reach with distributing food during this pandemic.
Absolutely. We had an outpour of support from community partnerships around the city, from not just other local schools that were willing to support us in our efforts, but also with organizations such as the House of Hope, who have recently supported us with a tremendous donation of fresh fruit and vegetables that we've given out. Church of Resurrection has been a tremendous partner, as well as affiliates at the Children's Mercy and American Red Cross have all supported us. So with the cumulative efforts of everyone, we've been able to serve 236 meals as of today since March 13th through this COVID pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to another question from the audience, going to ask Dr. Woodley, Letitia Woodley, what supports from your Office of Student Support Services were we able to continue to provide for students, and maybe what services we were not able to, where you maybe needed to leverage community partners in your area?
So one of the first things when we began to switch into our new normal with the COVID-19 was trying to locate our families. Well, we do know that in our district, we have a highly mobile student population. And so being able to make contact with all of our families to make sure what needs were, what the students actually need. That was our major focus from the beginning. And so we began to develop a strategy to be able to contact the families and find out what supports was needed. So we found one of the aha moments that we found was a lot of the last known addresses and phone numbers of some of our families were not updated due to the mobility. And so that created a challenge for us. And so we began to deploy supports where we, through utilizing the neighborhood associations, getting the word out, we developed a hotline number for families to be able to contact us with our campaign. Even though our doors are open, we're still here and available to serve you. We need you to contact us, provide us with your updated information so we can provide you with the support that's needed. So that was key. We began to reach out to families using our security department to do no contact wellness checks on our families at the last known address of families to try to reach out to them. And so we were able to make contact with several of our family members. But what we also had to do was make a shift in how we went about supporting families, because we were not able to do the traditional brief therapy, face-to-face contact that we would normally have. So we had to switch quickly, get our clinicians trained in the telehealth platform and a model for service delivery. So we began to implement our services via telemedicine and be able to provide services for our families in that manner. So it has been quickly having to shift and pivot to provide supports for our community, but we're seeing some success in being able to reach out to those families, but we still have several family members that we still have not been able to contact. And so so that still is a challenge with our mobility rates.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to take a question from a teacher, Chantel Edwards. She asked that in the event that we go into this new school year, continuing the virtual learning, as a teacher, she's asking for advice on how to motivate students to participate and remain on schedule and engaged. And we know that not all students were fully online during these last 6 weeks. I'm going to toss this to possibly Lloyd Jackson or Doug Bartle. I believe you probably have had to answer this question and provide this support in the past. How were some teachers successful in getting high participation rates from young people?
Well, I'll jump in there. One of the things when it comes to student participation, it really is going back to building those relationships not only with the student themselves, but also with that family, with those parents, with those caregivers for those students, and having that constant contact with them, at least weekly. If you can do it more often, certainly do that, because it goes back to connecting to those families, connecting to those kids to make sure that we're all on the same page. And it's a three-pronged approach here. Takes the school, takes the student, and takes those parents to stay involved. And we also had some schools who utilized and tried to figure out a way to utilize PBIS and other tools and techniques to really encourage that behavior of zooming in to those classrooms and also engaging in the online work.
Thank you, Doug. I heard reports that some students picked up additional work hours as a result of being at home, possibly because for a number of reasons. What other solutions did you hear from your colleagues around being able to provide additional access for young people? Are they able to access those lessons even beyond traditional school hours, maybe even complete the work in the evening through Google Classroom?
So, I mean, this is definitely an area that we struggled in. We found a lot of our students, specifically our Hispanic students and our undocumented students, use the time. They needed the time to work. People had lost jobs. Young men were going to work. And so, yes, teachers were flexible. We tried to make things available for them. I mean, like you said, it was on Google Classroom. They were there. They were able to work at their own pace. But it's definitely an area that we are still kind of searching for answers, trying to figure out how to engage the students that really took on a whole nother life, a whole nother set of responsibilities once COVID hit.
And I will chime in on this one because I'm on a lot of calls with superintendents across the country, and what you will find in a lot of your urban school districts is that you generally have around a 55 to 60% contact rate with students. So in many cases, within a 7-day period, that's who's logging in, and teachers have a way of connecting with them. And so with this pandemic, you know, I think we're all struggling, trying to figure out, you know, how do we, if we have to continue to be in this virtual world, how do we engage these students differently? How do we align our resources in a manner that will allow for us to go and work directly with these families? You know, we had family therapists when we couldn't make contact with some of our kids, going and knocking on doors and doing those kind of things and putting themselves at risk, because, you know, in the 3rd and 5th district, those are the 2 highest percentage of cases in this city right now. And that's primarily a large share of the families that we serve as a school district. And so we have to figure out, and that's the piece that we're going to continue to talk through on, have these focus groups. We're going to, you know, try to invite more folks to be a part of these conversations around how we can make this experience a better experience, because, you know, every statistic is telling us, coupled with the flu and the possibility of COVID-19 reemerging again in the fall, you know, there's a high chance that we may find ourselves back in this position again. And that engagement piece is going to be critical, because at that point, we have all our resources. We have our online curriculum. Our teachers have gone through the digital professional development. We're going through digital transformation right now as a district. You know, a lot of excuses in terms of what played out here in April won't be, it's just, you know, we won't, and I'm not saying excuses, but it's a reality. We did have some excuses that won't be available. So we have to be able to figure out this engagement piece. And those, you know, we're trying to figure that out at DESE. I'm on a committee right now with the Department of Elementary Secondary Education, and we're trying to figure out that very piece in the group I'm working with.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bedell. We definitely want to keep the experience of our students at the center of tonight's discussion. Now, I want to pivot back to Adriele. Adriele, in what ways were you and many of your friends impacted by not being in person or face-to-face in classrooms these final weeks of school?
Well, one of the major situations that was really affected was my graduation. And honestly, graduation is like the celebration. This is it, I'm done. And so it being affected kind of, you know, it really stirred a lot of trouble with all the graduating seniors. And I actually had a friend who is valedictorian for our school for Central, class of 2020, and she's not even, you know what I'm saying, able to really celebrate it as, you know, she would wanted it to be celebrated. But I mean, just prom being affected and graduation and basically like having to finish my senior year online, you know, the end of your senior year is the most crucial time of the year. That's where you get your college acceptances, you visit colleges, you know, do everything as far as like getting ready for your next step in life. And so it was really affected as far as, you know, not being able to have my graduation on time or not being able to attend prom. And that's what really kind of affected me as far as COVID, just coming in and like, here, this is what you got to do. But I mean, it was a challenge that was easy for me to adjust to. after, getting the help that I needed from teachers and all of the resources that I needed to make sure that everything was done the right way. So.
Right, thank you so much. We're going to go back to some questions from our audience, and we'll start with this question from Tierra Posey. For our students who receive extra support who have IEPs, how are they receiving services that they need in order to be successful? And how are those parents receiving the support that they need as well? For this question, we're going to ask Jaquita to respond.
Hello, thank you. Those are very good questions. I currently serve as the Assistant Director of Special Education. And when COVID-19 hit, we all were very concerned about our most vulnerable students, our students that are receiving special education services. We serve about 2,000 students in our district. And so what we did immediately, we had to get in touch with representatives of the federal level, the state level. Everyone began trying to craft new guidance on how to handle IEPs and implementation of IEPs. And what our district decided to do with the guidance from the state is to implement continuous learning plans. And with those learning plans, we looked at the individual IEPs and the services that they were needing. And we were able to take the services individually, building levels, grade levels, and put in this plan what was the maximum extent possible of services that we could provide for students. And with this plan, it was shared with our parents. Every case manager had the expectation to call every parent on their caseload, to get in touch with them and to explain to them and to see what it is that our families needed from us in that very moment to provide services and support for our students. Once we got the continuous plan in place, we immediately began to meet as a SPED leadership team to talk about how are we going to implement services and how can we ensure that we are addressing the IEP goals, because there are some waivers that were not given to us from the federal level, and there are still some expectations that we have to meet far as FAPE and providing services and providing goals. And so we armed our teachers with the PD that all teachers receive on the different platforms. We had conversations about calling parents and seeing specifically how to provide accommodations and modifications for the work that was sent home to every single student in this district. For our most vulnerable, like our autism program, some of our essential skills program, we had those case managers working with the coordinators, reaching out to families to say, how can we provide you activities for your child to still remain engaged in some level of education? And so we received a lot of feedback from our families, and we had to really individualize the support that we were able to give. For our students that are visually impaired, we were able to send home braillers with those families. And so they did have some resources and tools, but we know going into the fall, we have a lot of work to do. I'm very excited because we are going to be implementing and training teachers on a new program called through Goldbook, which is going to allow us to address IEP goals for students, send emails and messages directly from the program to parents, where they will be able to see how to assist us with progress monitoring those goals. And so we have a lot of things that we're working with. We develop an instructional SPED hotline. So if parents are in their room, anytime, night or day, if they had a question, they could call that hotline, and someone from the instructional SPED team would be available to answer that call or to return a call the very next day to support the instructional needs for our students. We also are working on a YouTube channel that we will provide supports for parents on how to accommodate your child when you're home, how to provide some of those modifications. And so we're consistently looking at different ways to support our families and continue to support our students and our teachers as we're trying to provide FAPE virtually right now.
All right, thank you very much. And as I'm looking at the questions from the audience, I see a question from Jillian Rainingbird around how were IEP goals met, and I believe you just answered her question as well. Moving to public policy, and the question, actually this question is coming from one of our board members, Board Chair Manser. Are there local policies that might need to be addressed regarding critical programs and initiatives that could really help with family stability? For that, I'm going to direct that to Gwen Grant. Do you see public policies that need to be addressed in order to support families should this virus come back again?
Absolutely. We are actually working on public policy at both the federal and local level to address the digital equity problems, to putting forth efforts to ensure that every household has digital access, that in every household. And that means not just technology. We want to have access to Wi-Fi. We want to make sure that every household has access to the devices, and that every household, that the users get the technical support that they need, so that this access results in effective utilization, so that they are effective with school, with employment and workforce development, with healthcare, and across the board. We also believe that the school district should be engaging with us in terms of public advocacy around recommendations to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to address the changes as we look towards innovation. How do we address tracking attendance in remote learning situations? Because this is not going away. Dr. Bedell was absolutely right. That we are more like 12 to 18 months out before you can expect to get back into a full classroom situation. So remote learning is here to stay. And so that means that how school districts are held accountable relative to accreditation standards needs to be revisited in this new environment. And so public policy changes at that level, public policy changes relative to digital equity access, and then advocacy for equitable allocation of COVID-19 recovery funding, federal dollars that come in through CDBG funding to the city of Kansas City, Missouri, to make sure that resources are allocated equitably to the communities with the highest need, getting the most money. Just put it more money in the urban core.
I did want to say this. I do have to extend some kudos to Gwen Grant, because she did convene a group of community leaders together. And in our last meeting, I believe you had the vice president, the national vice president, that was talking about policy in DC, as we've been trying to figure out how do we tackle this the Wi-Fi deserts we have. And we're not concentrating just only on the urban core. We're also talking about rural areas, because we know that our rural district counterparts are dealing with a lot of the Wi-Fi disparities that we're also dealing with. And so the conversation is really around, how do we get national movement through policy, and then how do we work on DESE and get, state level policies in place to address some of these inequities that are existing. And she's formed a number of different focus groups. And so I did want to thank you for putting all of that together, and thought that your voice would definitely be important, because you've reached out to us and given us a voice in this process around what the future of this city is going to look like. So thank you.
Can I just add one thing? I know we're short on time, but we are going to be hosting a virtual fireside chat to elevate the work in Kansas City to a national level around our digital equity efforts. And Dr. Bedell will be participating in that virtual fireside chat, along with Jeffrey Starks, who is the FCC commissioner, Mayor Quentin Lucas, Councilwoman Melissa Robinson, Carrie Coogan, who is the Deputy Director at the Kansas City Public Library. That will take place on June 23rd at, I believe, 10 a.m. We'll be putting more information out about that, but certainly hope that everyone will sign in and participate in this discussion. We're going to raise the profile of Kansas City to a national level around digital equity. We've done some great work here, and we actually are pretty much forerunners in this space. And it took a pandemic for people to recognize the real need relative to digital equity, and we're leveraging that to try to change policy.
All right, thank you very much. I see about 6 questions in the chat box from parents. Some are saying that parents are in survival mode, needing support. Other parents are asking, what are the additional resources, because not every parent was able to social distance and work from home, so they still continue their full-time jobs, and they have multiple kids at home who still needed support. I'm going to toss this to Kelly Waiter, who oversees our Family and Community Engagement Office. And Kelly, no pressure to answer it all right now, but it appears that this is a huge area where we need to come back with a really thought out plan. Anything you want to address kind of all of those parent engagement questions with?
Sure. So, we do have 15,000 students with a myriad of needs, responsibilities as parents and families. So those questions are really right on target, and we really feel and empathize with you as parents who are working full time, who have multiple children in the home with maybe one computer and one hotspot. We're really looking to engage you as parents to tell us more about that and what we could do better to help serve your families, whether it's providing 3 devices and 3 hotspots. Joe Phillips might get upset with me about saying that, but what are the things as parents that you would need to help us support you better? We currently have a thought exchange that's a crowdsourcing platform open right now to talk about what has gone well and what has been a challenge during this time. And as we forecast for the future, what should we consider as we get ready to launch school again in the fall? So you can find that thought exchange link for the crowdsourcing platform on our website, on our social media accounts. You got emailed to you if you're a parent in the district or a staff member in the district. So participate in that and give us some good feedback about what you need, because we're interested in hearing what you need and listening to you to help us solve that when so many of us are also serving as employees and parents during this time.
Right, thank you so much. And staying on that same topic of resources for families, I do want to ask Ava and Allison just to chime in on ways in which you think we can do an even better job, or possibly make additions for supporting families whose native language may not be English. Any thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, well, the conversations that I've had with parents, I didn't find that they had a hard time accessing resources, because especially for our Latino community, we have the Hispanic Development Fund and the Mexican Consulate and Maddie Rhodes. But the conversation always circled back to the virtual learning and how to use the Chromebooks and how to get on the Wi-Fi, because as an English speaker, that could be overwhelming. And now, throw in that language portion of it. But what I did find was that it was just these different levels of anxiety, because if you have multiple students in different grades, and the parent doesn't speak English, but you have a high schooler who does, then the high schooler becomes the home teacher. And the high schooler then becomes the caregiver. And in some instances, the parents were like, okay, you're home, then I could go get a job, so you watch the kids. So there's so many responsibilities on the shoulders of these students. Really, the only way to know is just to have these one-on-one conversations. And those are very time consuming, but that's how you get the information. You have these one-on-one conversations and they trust you, and then they tell you, and then you can really get that whole picture.
Right. Thank you so much for that response. Allison, anything to add before we go to our final 3 questions for the evening? I'm looking at the time.
Yes, I will be fast. I think another, in addition to that, is really partnering with community agencies and getting to hearing what they're hearing from their clients. So we partner very heavily with the Jewish Vocational Service, and they're offering town halls like this, but in multiple languages. So we'll be connecting with them to find out what they're hearing from families, what their needs are. Sometimes it's culturally not appropriate to share some things that family, like the families might be facing. And so we're just trying to support as best we can and use other agencies that might be working with our families. We're still considering also like giving physical supports to families, like we're going to be providing summer reading backpacks. So there will be like literacy activities and backpacks and school supplies and books and math 100s charts and things like that students can physically work on and use at home. I think the technological divide is going to be real for a while. Even when the families do have the devices in front of them, it's uncomfortable for a lot of families. And so it's still on us to provide things that will keep students learning at home, whether it's in their native language or in English. And so we're working on what those opportunities might look like.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to lump these two questions together from our audience, one coming from a teacher, one coming from a principal. Teacher Joe Cunningham is asking, next year, will instruction look any different, or will we go back to traditional education models as we did prior to the pandemic? And lumped with that, a principal, Robert Lee, is asking, will there be additional training for teachers and support staff in the virtual learning platform? And so
let me answer that. Let me answer that because I do want to get people off at 8. I'm serious about that. I know people have been on screens all day. So in my closing remarks, I will wrap those into my closing remarks. So here's the bottom line. And this is what I'm hoping that people will hear loud and clearly from me. I'm not interested in going back to the way that we were doing schooling. Let's just be very clear. You can go and look at the data over the last 3 decades, and it tells you that our system has not worked for the vast majority of students in this system. And so if that means we need to begin to explore what different calendar options look like that would allow for us to provide more support for our kids, if it means looking at different ways that we look at how we can alternative methods of instruction and how we grade students and how do we make sure that we look at work products differently, that's the KCPS I want us to begin to move towards. A KCPS that embraces this digital world that we all have to interface with, right? Because at this point, it becomes a civil rights issue, in my opinion, when you have families that cannot access technology, they cannot access some of the finer things in life. And right now, a lot of business is being conducted online. There are things that you don't even have to do now to leave your house anymore. So families are getting left behind in this country. And a lot of those families are families that we serve. As far as our teachers are concerned, we got our digital learning roadmap that we put in. It's on our website, but we know that we're going to continue to, continue to evolve in this and what kind of PD we provide for our teachers. We have digital champions out there that are available to help us. And I think for us, we just also need for this community to tell us, Dr. Bedell, you and your team and the board of directors, here's the things. We got a strategic plan and we've gotten some really good results out of that strategic plan, but we haven't gotten the kind of results that I'm accustomed to us getting when you put in those kind of strategies. And so there's more that we have to do, and we have to figure out how do we lift the bottom, right? Because if you lift the bottom in this city, you lift out those who've been shut out of the Kansas City dream, you make this a great city for everybody. And as much as people want to say it's a great city, it's not a great city for everybody. That has been my conversation with this board. I don't have a problem calling it to the carpet. I've been here 4 years, going on 5. I think I've earned that ability to call it the way that I see it, because we also have data to back up that when we call these things to the carpet, we have been able to get results, but we have to do a better job. And those are my closing remarks. We will continue to move this work forward. There's a lot of questions in here that we have not had an opportunity to answer. I believe Kelly will get those questions answered and we'll get those posted up to the video. But I think the future is going to be bright, as scary as it is right now. And I'll tell you, I'm nervous as heck about all of this, but I'm also very optimistic about what the future could look like. And we all just have to say, enough is enough of doing things the way that we've done it. And we have not done well enough for this community. And we got to come together as a community if we want the other side of this to be on the right side of history.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bedell, for those closing remarks, and thank you to all of our panelists for participating tonight. Thank you to the attendees for being here to engage in this conversation with us. If we did not get to your question this evening, Kelly and I will get together after the event to answer as many questions as possible. If you did not get a chance to ask a question, or if you think of a question you would like to pose over the next couple of days, you're able to email equity@kcpublicschools.org, and we will respond to you as well. So again, thank you. This will not be our final conversation on this topic. We will host future virtual town hall discussions as we continue to move our organization toward a more equitable organization. So thank you again for being with us here this evening, and everyone have a great night.